Good evening, welcome. I'm John. I'm a bookseller at Literati bookstore in downtown Ann Arbor, Michigan. We're so pleased to welcome Michigan-based Pushcart Prize recipients to our At Home with Literati series this evening to read from their work. Just a quick webinar overview for those of you who are just joining us. The chat is closed this evening, but you can keep the chat window open. So I'll be sharing links to purchase the most recent Pushcart Prize anthology and books by tonight's authors from Literati throughout the event. Live transcription is available to you as well on your toolbar. Should you need it, there's a CC icon down on your toolbar. And if you're watching us later on our YouTube channel, you can always find links to purchase books, the Pushcart Prize anthology, books by tonight's authors, in the description directly below me. And be sure to subscribe as well to stay up to date on all of our events as they become available on our channel. And as a reminder, you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. And if you live in Southeast Michigan or the Ann Arbor area, our doors are, of course, back open to the public for in-store shopping. Most of all, we'd just like to thank you for your attendance this evening, or this morning, or this afternoon, depending on where and when in the world you may be joining us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to tonight's host, our master of ceremonies, and also our first reader. Jamie McCarthy is a junior studying English at the University of Michigan. She will also be applying to the fiction writing subconcentration in February. Jamie writes predominantly flash and other short form fiction while interning with the Adirondack Review. Please join me in welcoming Jamie and all of tonight's readers into your living room.
Thanks, John. I'd like to thank Literati and Ron especially for getting me this opportunity through the Adirondack Review. And I'm really excited to be here, and they've been gracious enough to let me read a little piece of mine. So without further ado, I'll get on with that. So this is called Latin Mass at Our Local Noodles and Company. Do you remember the day you told me you should kill yourself? It was right after you told me I should kill myself. Call me Ladybird. We went to dinner. I drove, you couldn't, so it was more that I took you to dinner at Noodles and Company after having to take you to St. Vincent for my pre-calc textbook I'd left in my locker. We took your car, a used Acura with a horrible turning radius that I hated driving. And I hated driving with you, your knuckles white around the grab handle and resentful fear towards your daughters in the driver's seat. But I still had my permit, and Dad usually wasn't around. We didn't talk on the way there. The only voice in the car was Stevie Nicks's. There wasn't much for us to talk about as of late anyway. Neither of us could find the words, too out of touch with language. Leaden clouds drooped over the pot-old road, bringing with them a wind that overturned dulling oak leaves like fingers flipping through the pages of a hand-me-down Bible. That's how you know it's going to rain, I tell my roommates now. That's what my mom used to say. I watched as a brittle leaf, the color of pallid olive skin, landed on the windshield. As for Stevie, though, you guys had plenty to discuss. Glancing over to check on you, as you stared at the lifeless scene streaking across the window, Stevie sang Landslide. I saw a tear well up and dry in the outside corner of your eye. Now, whenever the song plays, I wonder if I'm wilting for the same reason you did. I'll never ask. I did ask, though, sitting at our table in the Noodles and Company while picking up my pasta, if you had fun watching the Blackhawks game on the big screen in the basement the night before. You attempted a trembled stab at an elbow noodle, mumbling to yourself about something I couldn't understand. I leaned over the table for your fork and fed you a bite. What about when we went to that game a couple months ago? Did you have fun then? It was one of the only times we'd gone to a game that they won. That friend of Dad's who gets creepy around Fiona and me now that we're older got us box seats, and we gorged off of sundaes from the dessert cart all the way up to the end of the third period. The teams were tied. I wanted to see a fight. You entertained the idea. I sat at the edge of my seat and imagined Jacob wrestling with God right out there on the ice as I watched the Hawks start up the ice for what would be the deciding factor in the game. You said you had your fun, your hand in mine on the way out the door after we finished our meal. But it wasn't enough. From behind the wheel. What about that goal? Do you remember that goal? My own questions echoed answerless throughout the car, like it'd been stripped down to nothing but its steel frame. I stopped asking once I realized my body was that steel frame. You had me pull over half a mile from the house because you wanted to walk the rest of the way. I tried to talk you out of it. Look, Mom, it's raining now. You got to stay with me. But the door was open and shut, and suddenly I was idling alone in the middle of the street with nothing but my skeleton and a chassis. I circled the neighborhood, picking up soggy leaves in the wheels, just in case you lost your way. but I knew you found your way just fine when I heard you belting out your chorus. You have no compassion, you have no compassion, thundering through the side door as though angels were brawling. You remember it too, but only the chorus itself, or at least how it felt to sing, I hope. What you don't remember is how I'd told you, tears souring my throat like cocaine drip, that I'd rather drop dead on the bathroom floor at my own hand than be living like this. Nor do you remember that you replied, then maybe you should. Nor how I choked back as I shot. You wouldn't remember me anyways. But I think you do remember, in some shapeless way, slipping a note under the door after I locked myself in the bathroom. I'm sorry, it should be me instead. It looked like you'd written it with your left hand. I pleaded with God on my knees, asking in vain if you did. There wasn't anything left to do. I started to spend a lot of time with God soon after that day because school became the most concrete thing in my life. Do you remember when I would take you to church? I'd help you navigate through the pews when, like sheep, we'd shuffle towards the altar for communion to the organ's empty hymn. When the priest placed the bread gingerly in your palm, you'd look over your shoulder as a child in a crowd does when they've just realized they're not sure where they are or what to do. Arm in arm, I would usher you back to our seats, your hand still stiffly open right over left, bread untouched. I'd then transfer it to your tongue like you were back at one of the weekly Latin masses you attended all those years ago in a Catholic high school just like mine. Chew, I'd remind you. Your eyes had nothing in them. I knew it wouldn't be long until I'd need to remind you who I was. I haven't been back to church. Thank you. And so now, without further ado, I will turn it over to Ron. So Ron Riekki's books include My Ancestors Are Reindeer Herders and I Am Melting in Extinction from the Apprentice House Press, Post-Traumatic from Hoot and Waddle, and UP from the Ghost Road Press. Riekki co-edited Undocumented from the Michigan State University Press and The Many Lives of the Evil Dead, McFarland, and edited The Many Lives of It by also McFarland Press. And Here, MSU Press. Here, Women Writing on Michigan's Upper Peninsula, the MSU Press, which won the Independent Publisher Book Award, and The Way North, Collected Upper Peninsula New Works, Wayne State University Press, which won an award for Michigan Notable Book. Riekki wrote the screenplay Thank You for Your Teeth, which screened at 109 theaters in France, and America, which was distributed throughout Greece. So I'll hand it over to Ron now.
Thank you. Thanks. And it's interesting that I was going to say that we're doing this on, on Martin Luther King Day. When I was in the military, there was actually during Desert Storm, around that time, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, there was a bookstore, but the bookstore had like a massive amount of books on like submarines and weaponry and crap like that. And then there was also a major, massive section that was just dirty magazines. And then there was this tiny little section that was like classical type literature. And there was I just was desperate for anything that was like intelligent. So I remember there was a letter from Birmingham jail. And I remember reading that when I was on this isolated duty station, and it really blowing my mind. I remember that in George Orwell's 1984. And so I think absolutely Martin Luther King was one of the people that really had me interested in writing, because there was so much power in what he could do in that thin little book. So I do remember that distinctly. And then the thing I'm going to segue into me reading I'm just going to read one poem. It's going to be the one that I got the Pushcart for. And I was talking with a PTSD counselor, and I was writing really, really dark stuff. And so she had recommended, why don't I try writing other than some of the trauma from the military? And I was like what? And she was like, well, I don't know, like write about your childhood, about, you know, time with your father, about God, those sorts of things. And so then I basically said, okay, let's try to write that poem. And so then I write that poem, and then it gets a Pushcart Award. So I realized maybe I need to listen to my counselors more often. But this is a poem that's called Finland. It was in Boomer Lit Mag, and thank you very much for them for nominating me. And it's divided into 3-line stanzas, basically 3 sections of 3-line stanzas. So it's a theme of threes. This is the poem. I'm writing this on an ice cube. Well, to be more accurate, an icicle octagon, a wintry stop sign, the one near my home in northern Michigan, where we moved because it was most like Osamo. because we like places where there aren't many people, but a lot of snow. It's difficult to write on an ice cube, but no tougher than heating your home with wood. I remember hauling wood, helling wood, being wood, how my childhood was really childwood. The slaving over slivers was my dad in gloves, the path to the woodpile so memorized in my mind that I see it now daily, before bed, during bed, after bed, even the few weeks when I moved into this apartment and didn't have a bed. But there it is, the pile, the wood, my dad, the sun, the moon, the empty sky, the full sky. My dad would look up at the sun and say, "Where's its chimney?" We'd see God hauling wood to the sun. He'd see each star as a sauna. He'd sing the Finnish national anthem, which began, our land, which really meant our wood. And then the next line, our fatherland. My father singing this, his voice echoing, fatherland, father wood, son wood, father God, the song, the heat, the cold, how they clashed, the song caught fire, the sun ran out of heat, winter owned our lives, the house, everything, and we walked backwards to avoid the wind and got inside. And when I think of place, I think of fireplace, of how hot my back would be, my toes frozen, my father grabbing me by the face, saying straight into my iris, "You're Finn, Finn." His hands so cold, my nose so sooty, my life so strange, night like lightning, snow like heat, God like fury, the house so full. That is it. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you, Ron. I will turn it over now to David Baker, whose many honors include fellowships and awards from the Poetry Society of America, National Endowment for the Arts, and the Guggenheim Foundation. The recipient of the Theodore Rothke Memorial Poetry Prize, Baker teaches at Denison University and lives in Granville, Ohio. Without further ado, here's David.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for taking care of us. I also want to say thank you on behalf of all of us to John at the bookstore for putting this together for everybody, and to Ron, not only for reading that really fine poem that he just read, but for organizing this night. And I want to thank the reason for our being here, a man named Bill Henderson, who is the editor of what is one of the most heroic projects in publishing in this country, the Pushcart Prize, which is why we're here. As I said, this guy's done this work kind of by himself for years and years and years, on a typewriter, writing by hand, gathering what he thinks of as the best writing in small presses in America. And as a writer and as an editor, I'm really grateful for that work. So I want to sort of tip my hat to Bill Henderson for this. I'm going to read two poems. I'm mindful of the time. I'll just read two. And the first one is not a poem of mine. It is a poem in the 2021 Pushcart, and it was written by a very dear friend of mine, Stanley Plumley, who died in 2019. And he asked me to take care of his poems when he was gone. And Michael Collier and I typed up his poems, printed out his poems, sent off his poems, and a batch of poems that I sent to the American Poetry Review, it was read by Liz Scanlon, includes this poem that I'm going to read, Sycamore, that was chosen by the Pushcart editors for this award. So this seems like a good way to celebrate his work and the Pushcart Prize. This is Stanley Plumley, a poem called Sycamore. If you couldn't have an elm-lined walk, you might have one of these for show and tell, with Mrs. Allen standing at the back end of the class, who meant for us to hold up one example of a leaf and talk the best we could in front of every other stumbling second grader, whose usual was scarlet maple, golden oak, or some hybrid color, heart-shaped, half-spotted kind of thing, half wet or fading as the storyteller wandered through the history of how he or she got here safely with it. Mine from the front lawn was hardly any better, since it covered more than twice my open fingers, palmate on my palm, and was turning toward its dry and pockmarked end, like my now vein heavy hands, which, when the nurses try for blood, are better than the arms. As I remember those 1,000 years ago, I held it from my body as if, while I was talking, it had died. And my story was an elegy of time, the seasons passing, winter coming on. Of course, this is a lie. I was silent and stood there in my cylinder of silence, like the tree the leaf had fallen from, until the teacher, in her mercy, told me to sit down, the way I'm sitting now, typing. Nothing ever dies, says the science of mortality. It's all chemistry and change from one form to another. I was dying, holding on to dear life with a dead leaf that was changing even further into the endless moment that morning, curling, still alive, within my hand. As I look at the poem in the page here, I see it was nominated for the Pushcart by 7 people. That's Stanley Plumley's poem, Sycamore. And it appears, since I'm doing a little advertising, it appears in his posthumous book, Middle Distance, which was published about a year ago. Also in that issue of the American Poetry Review was a poem of mine that I wrote for Stanley and about Stanley. And it appears next to his in the book, and I'm very touched by that. I'm not going to read that poem because it's a little too long. It was 5 pages in manuscript and it would take me all night. I'm going to read one more poem then of mine, a shorter poem, and a poem about Stanley as a way again to pay tribute to him. So this is a little poem called 6 Hours. I visited him several times during the last season of his life in Washington, D.C. This took place in the hospital a few days before he was gone. 6 hours. His hands are folded and gathered on his chest. Each arm is a wing in stillness, tucked close. He has laced his fingers loosely over and under like the strings of good shoes. Someone has come to check on his breathing, tap the tubes, add a few numbers to the chart. We might see his father's hands in these hands. He might hold them for us. Pages in a book. What book? We'd swear he moved. Now someone has opened a blind and the sun comes wild with sudden bright splashes over the room, the side table with its small cup of pills. He blinks one eye to the warmth. He's resting with his head on 2 pillows. Did he smile? In her poem, he calls hands requisite for reading, for holding nothing. He looks as though he's holding back breath from a wound. Or if he were standing, touching his heart to see if his pulse were secure. His hands are still, soft to touch when we touch, and dappled with the canker of field crabs in a yard in Ohio in the sun. The boy in him might pick one and throw it to scatter those blue jays back into clouds. So thank you, everybody, for including me in tonight's reading, and I'll stop with that.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, Stanley, also. So with that, we'll move on to Lydia. So Lydia is the Helen Zell Visiting Professor in Fiction at the University of Michigan. They've received a Stegner Fellowship, a Rana Jaff Foundation Writers Award, 3 Pushcart Prizes, a Creative Writing Fulbright in Poland, a grant from the Elizabeth George Foundation, and fellowship from McDowell, Yaddo, Hedgebrook, Jurassic, and the James Merrill House, and elsewhere. Their fiction has appeared in Tin House, American Short Fiction, the Southern Review, and the Paris Review, and is forthcoming in One Story and VQR. Their story collection, Rainbow Rainbow, will be published in May 2022 by Catapult in North America and Scribner in the UK. So we will turn it over to Lydia Conklin.
Thanks so much, Jamie, and thanks also to John and Ron for putting this together. I'm going to read from my story, Laramie Time, that was in this pushcart. And I'm just going to read from a little ways in, but all you have to know is that Lee is the narrator, and her girlfriend Maggie are trying to conceive a child with their best friend Arun. The day after Maggie's positive surge, I met Arun at the door to our apartment building by the block glass in the stairwell. His hand trembled as he brushed ice off his shoulder. Am I early? You're perfect. I sounded like I was hissing, let me steal your jeans. I led him to the living room. Maggie was waiting upstairs. She was too nervous to socialize until the process was complete, but it felt wrong to send Arun off to masturbate instantly. Besides, I liked his company. Here was this 35-year-old man, beautiful and brilliant, with a perfect job, fine without a baby or even a girlfriend. He saw a few girls in town and sometimes took trips to LA, returning sunny and fortified. But largely he was the picture of someone who could be happy alone. How's my Maggie, he asked. She's great. Arun loved Maggie best. Everyone did. She was pretty, like a fairy tale girl lost in the woods, but brilliant. Everyone said she should go for a PhD before she got too old. She's waiting upstairs. I forgot what she looks like, it's been so long. He scratched the stiff chin of the taxidermied prairie dog we'd all bought on a joyride to Centennial. If it weren't for the paperwork, I wouldn't have seen you either. Things have been rough. He looked up, eyes big. Oh, I know. Can I get you a drink? Nice seduction technique, he said. It's 2 p.m. How about pork rinds? I'll take a drink. By the way, this is the weirdest thing I've ever done. I'd been headed to the kitchen and I turned to laugh. Arun always put me at ease. How could I have forgotten? But his face, forever photo ready, had collapsed. You okay? Just get me a drink. His tone was steely. In the kitchen, I fretted over what to serve. I'd stocked his favorites, beer, Jack and Coke, single serving cans of a spritzer called Naughty Fruits, but none felt tonally appropriate. I pulled down a bottle of tangerine schnapps left over from a Christmas pudding, some bitters, and a novelty soda called Cool Mint Surprise. I whipped these with egg whites, grape jelly, and coconut shavings. The colors refused to integrate, though, and the drink was a bubbling, breathing rainbow. Arun took one confused peek at my creation, helped himself to a swig, and grimaced. Listen, I said, you don't have to do this. Arun gulped more of the rainbow. Egg white foamed on his chin. You know I want to. He threw back another sip, and the green layer of the drink splashed his shirt. You guys are good, he asked, shifting his focus to the ceiling. Of course. The question startled me. The issue with Maggie had always been kids. Everything else was perfect. The sex, the conversation. We both loved hiking and rice and audiobooks and begging bakeries for fresh bread at 4 a.m. Neither of us cleaned refrigerators or harped on dusting. I cleared my throat, trying to sound natural. Can I ask you something? Arun nodded, watching with concern. Why don't you want to raise kids? Egg white shone opalescent on his chin. You want to know? Of course. Nothing he'd say would change my mind. I'd heard all the arguments. I'd made them myself. Global health, overpopulation, climate change, career surrender, drudgery. I hated chores. I hated shopping. I only liked 1 in 100 kids. Those were tricky odds. I didn't want Kitty barfing diseases. I didn't care about advancing my genes. I didn't want Maggie's body to change. I didn't want to read a book about parenting. But everyone said once the kid was born, you were happy. No one would admit they made a mistake, he said. By having a kid, I mean, there's too much investment. Yeah, I'd thought of that. That's not why I'm scared, though. I should have ended the conversation. Maggie was waiting, but I had to ask, then why? My nephew, he said, lives in Queens. When he was 4, he escaped his bed. He opened the front door and stood outside until a bus stopped. He got on the bus and rode into Manhattan. No, Arun exaggerated all the time for laughs. He did. Arun set his empty glass on the steamer trunk. My brother and his wife were asleep. They think the bus driver was high, but I bet everyone thought Sunil was with someone else. He rode over the Queensboro Bridge and into Midtown. He got off at Lincoln Center, seriously. Arun wore that hurt look he got when he feared we didn't believe him. Later, people said they wondered about the kid, but no one did anything. He rolled his eyes. New Yorkers, man, no offense. Arun had forsaken New York to live as a pure Westerner. Hey, I said, I'm in Wyoming now. If I'd found that kid, I would have scooped him up and ferried him to safety. I would have made him laugh in my arms until his parents claimed him. Anyway, Arun said, this lady found him. Phew, I said. No, his face darkened. It's not good. They went to a play. I guess it had some weird stuff. A man dressed as a wolf, some naked kid, a stone people handled. It was a festival entry. The script isn't published. I've checked. I'm sure you would have loved it. So they saw a play. I said so. I liked the idea of a kid at a play, head bobbing at knee level, following me to museums and parks and afternoon pubs. Having a kid didn't mean we were doomed to languish in pits of plastic balls. And we could figure out what he saw, right? We could find the script, interview audience members, but what gets me is the time around the play. Like what kind of person, and not to be sexist, but what kind of woman sees a 4-year-old lost in Midtown Manhattan and doesn't call the police? Instead, she takes him to a goddamn play. I looked at the ceiling. Maggie must be angry we were taking so long. Stress impaired conception. I pictured the wrinkles around her mouth deepening. Something bad happened. Sunil wasn't the same after. He turned into this mini adult. He didn't bounce around like he used to. You don't understand. He was a puppy before. These questions and silly voices all the time. Even in timeouts, he'd dance in the corner and then nothing. And it wasn't just the play. He didn't understand the play. You think she molested him? My heart surged. I hadn't met Sunil, but I pictured him anxiously eager, little hands grabbing the air, clowning as he bounced from foot to foot. We'll never know. A moody expression bled over Arun because he doesn't know, but it affected him. He can't tell us. Did she touch him? Did she say something? Did she show him a picture? He gripped his knee. Whenever I think of having kids, I fall into that panic. I know it would never happen again, but 1,000 situations like it would. Little moments, sure, but I can't stand the idea of letting the kid loose to live a private life. He shook his head. That spooks me. I get it, I said. I shouldn't say this crap to you. He raised his tumbler. Your rainbow juice made me do it. I lifted my water and we clicked glasses. You'll be a beautiful mother, he said, regret wet in his eyes, whether for his own childhood or his missed fatherhood, I couldn't tell. I had a flash of wishing I'd been Arun's mother. No, Sunil's. I saw a hairy, upright beast lurching across the stage, a boy too shy to seize the sleeve of his chaperone. When it came down to assuming responsibility for a floppy body lost in the world, I was sure I could be flexible and resilient, that I could put a little person first. Not only that I could do it, but that I wanted to, and not only that I wanted to, but that I had to. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. So for our final reader tonight will be Kurt Luchs, and Kurt has poems published in Plume Poetry Journal, The Sun Magazine, and London Grip. He won the 2022 Pushcart Prize, as well as the 2019 Atlanta Review International Poetry Contest. He has written humor for The New Yorker, The Onion, and McSweeney's Internet Tendency. His humor collection, It's Funny Until Someone Loses an Eye, Then It's Really Funny, 2017, and his poetry collection, Falling in the Direction of Up, published in 2021, are published by Sagging Meniscus Press. He lives in Portage, Michigan. So I'll turn it over to Kurt. Oh, I think you're muted.
I know what I'm doing. Thanks, Jamie, and thanks also to John at Literati, and especially to Ron for ringmastering this whole thing. I was very pleased to take part in it. I'm going to read a couple of things from my poetry book. It's my first full-length collection. I have a chapbook as well, but this is the Pushcart winning poem called Father's Belt, published in Reed magazine. I don't like holding his pants up. He's gone to fat since his discharge from the Marines, and frankly, it's a chore. Nor do I care for being hung in the closet, left in the dark between two dress shirts that haven't a clue as to the horrors and pleasures that life holds. The worst thing that ever happened to them was a ketchup stain on the cuff, easily removed by the most inept of dry cleaners, his dry cleaner. No, what I like is when he takes me off and not to put away. I like when his rage comes bubbling up, never far from the surface, set off by whatever you little bastards have done today. It doesn't really matter what, does it? Then his hands are strong again. I feel his love through me as he folds me in half and makes me snap against myself with a loud crack. That's to make you afraid. It hardly seems necessary, yet I assure you, it's an essential part of the ceremony. It's foreplay. The smell of fear is an aphrodisiac. Then all at once I'm whistling through the air. My flesh meets yours in a mad rush, and there is joy in heaven. My ecstasy cannot be contained. The red welts come quickly. Purple bruises will follow. And sometimes if his passion is fierce enough, there's a bit of blood from my buckle end, the sweetest release. He says he loves you. He does it all for love. I don't mind. I know it's me he really loves. I love him too. And I love you, all 7 of you, each receiving my affections differently because love is unending. There's always more. Do you realize, aside from him, you're the only ones I ever get to touch? I think I've got a few minutes here, so I might read a couple more from my book. This one's called Morning Likeness. Dawn creeps forward, a scout wriggling silently toward the edge of an enemy encampment. The yellow and orange that begin to bleed into the pale blue are the yellow and orange of memory, so that something utterly novel, a new day unlike any before it, raises tiny hairs of nostalgia on the neck. What was comes between us and what is, blinding us moment by moment, and yet it's the only way we have to understand anything. This is like that, though that is not this. In such a world, we are always one step behind. The sunrise does not become real until reflected in a puddle. The morning cries of crows, surprised to find it all beginning again, cannot be heard properly until they return as echoes from across the lake. I like all kinds of music, but Bach is my main man. And this is a poem about my favorite piece by him. It's called Bach's Keyboard Concerto No. 5 in F minor, BWV 1056, Largo. Here, he dances with death. The dance is quiet and slow, stately yet affectionate. After all, they know each other well. An orphan at 10, his own children dropping like flies, then his beloved Maria, and he himself shortly to be murdered by the same quack eye doctor who would also get away with killing the other genius of the Baroque, Handel. In this mesmerizing middle movement, though, the body count falls away as we count notes and steps in a progression that is at once inevitable and surprising. My heart quakes at the impossible beauty of it, and even more at how easily this could have been one of the many scores lost forever after his passing. 1/3 of everything he ever wrote sold as scrap paper to wrap fish. His own sons, not one of whom was fit to empty his final chamber pot, thought their father's music was overwrought, turgid, passé. Death politely disagrees. And so the dance continues, with Glenn Gould and numberless others cutting in to give the cantor of St. Thomas Church a much needed rest. These are short. I think I have time for one or two more, do I?
Yeah, you should be good, I think.
All right. Thank you. This is the title poem from my collection, Falling in the Direction of Up. It comes from a catchphrase from the 1950s British radio comedy series, The Goon Show, and a drawing by Michael Dunn. Are birds jealous of angels because they can fly in realms beyond the physical? Are angels jealous of birds because they can fly without having to carry God? Humans are jealous of both, I think. The angels we can't see and can't even begin to prove exist, and the birds we see every day soaring over our heads, owning the sky in a way we never can, despite our planes, helicopters, and hot air balloons. We learn to covet what is near to us, yet forever beyond our reach, though it may also be the thing that causes us to look upward, out of ourselves, beyond being into becoming. That look took us to the moon once. Someday it may take us to the stars. Whatever it is we believe we are doing, we are always either falling to earth or falling in the direction of up. I will fall that way if you fall with me. And it occurs to me now that two hands holding each other almost make a wing. Okay, one more. It's short. I don't mean to be greedy, but here it is. It's called Meditation, and it's sort of an attempt to define meditation and also a failed attempt at it. The long shuddering intake of breath from the air conditioner plays its one plaintive note for all it's worth. So much feeling in that undying death rattle. I believe more than the air is being conditioned. And behind it, the cry of crickets where there are no crickets. The crickets are in me. All of this is somewhere in me. And I am somewhere else, a vista opening upon a verge. Scenes waiting to become sounds, sounds waiting to become words, words waiting to become thoughts, thoughts waiting to remake the world, because the world they behold is unbearably bright and utterly silent, strange and beautiful and terrifying. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. And thank you to Lydia, to Ron, to David, and to Jamie for being here and sharing your work with us this evening. Back when Ron reached out to me, I think in the summer, there was boundless optimism in the air and optimism that we would do this event in person. And I'm just so grateful to continue to be able to do it, and that Literati is still here to put on these events virtually, even 2 Januaries into a pandemic. So here's to hoping that we will be able to gather again in the future for all of your books, subsequent books as well. And until then, to our viewers, thank you so much for joining us and being here this evening. And to our readers, thank you. You can, of course, find links to purchase books in the description below me if you're watching later on YouTube. And if you're here live, there are links to purchase the anthology as well as collections and books by our authors in the chat. Have a great evening, everybody. Take care.